I take everything like that with a pinch of salt, really, because you can't say who's best.
Brian May is still celebrated as one of the greatest rock guitarists of all time. The man who, alongside his iconic Queen bandmates, helped redefine the very sound of music. We all remember the anthems, Bohemian Rhapsody, We Are the Champions, and Somebody to Love. On stage, the band looked like a perfect unit. 4 musical minds in harmony. But behind the scenes, the reality was far from peaceful. What fans never saw was the storm brewing beneath the surface. A fierce personal feud between Brian and one particular co-star. Guitars were smashed, recording sessions were sabotaged, and at one point, it nearly turned into a full-blown fist fight. The tension was so fierce, it's a miracle the band held it together at all. For decades, Queen kept the drama buried. But now, at 77, Brian May is finally pulling back the curtain and revealing the one person he truly despised working with. And trust us, you'll never guess who it was. How Queen's lead guitarist discovered his talent. Before he was shredding guitar solos to sold-out stadiums around the world, Brian May was just a bright, curious kid with a love for the stars and a mind wired for music. Born on July 19, 1947, in Hampton Hill, Middlesex, Brian Harold May grew up as the only child of Ruth and Harold May. His father was an aircraft engineer and draftsman for the Ministry of Aviation, and his mother, Scottish by birth, brought a strong sense of warmth and groundedness to their home. From the beginning, Brian was the kind of child who could lose himself in books, science experiments, or a musical instrument. He attended Hanworth Road Primary School and later earned a scholarship to Hampton Grammar School, where he excelled in both academics and creativity. By the time he finished school, he had 10 O-levels and 3 A-levels in physics, mathematics, and applied mathematics. His academic path led him to Imperial College London, where he studied physics and mathematics, graduating with honors in 1968. But the real magic was happening on the side. Even while immersed in equations and astronomy, Brian had already built his own electric guitar, the now famous Red Special with his father. Crafted from an old fireplace mantel and bicycle parts, this homemade guitar would go on to define Queen's sound. With its warm, distinctive tone, it wasn't just an instrument. It was a piece of his identity. While in college, Brian formed a band called 1984 with his schoolmate Tim Staffel. They played a few local gigs before moving on to something more serious. That something was a new band called Smile, which included Brian on guitar, Tim Staffel on bass and vocals, and a young dental student named Roger Taylor on drums. Their sound was promising, but things truly shifted when Tim introduced them to a flamboyant art student and aspiring singer named Farouk Bulsara, better known today as Freddie Mercury. Freddie was captivated by the group's potential and pushed them to think bigger, louder, and bolder. When Staffel left Smile in 1970, Freddie stepped in and brought with him not just powerful vocals, but a whole new vision. He even had a new name for the band, Queen. At first, the name raised eyebrows. Some thought it was too extravagant or had connotations they didn't want to explain. But Freddie insisted it symbolized royalty, strength, and theatricality, and he wasn't wrong. The newly formed Queen, Mercury, May, Taylor, and early bassist Mike Gross played their first gig under the new name at City Hall in Truro, Cornwall, on June 27, 1970. Roger's mother had booked the show as a charity event for the Red Cross. Few people showed up, but history had already been made. A few bassists came and went, but in 1971, John Deacon joined the band, locking in the legendary lineup that would change music forever. Queen's self-titled debut album dropped in 1973, featuring songs like Liar and Keep Yourself Alive. Freddie soon adopted the name Mercury, inspired by lyrics he wrote in My Fairy King. And the band leaned hard into their unique identity, fusing opera, hard rock, glam, and sweeping theatrical performances into a genre all their own. But while Queen's rise was meteoric, Brian never abandoned his passion for science. Though he paused his doctoral research to focus on the band, he never stopped thinking about the stars. Decades later, he returned to Imperial College and completed his PhD in astrophysics, proving to the world that rock stars can wear lab coats too. Outside of music and science, Brian's also a deeply committed animal rights activist, often speaking out about wildlife conservation and animal welfare. He's published books on stereoscopic photography, advocated for environmental protection, and remains active in both academic and humanitarian circles. Brian May isn't just the brain behind Queen's iconic guitar riffs. He's a physicist, an inventor, a writer, a knighted Brit, and a man whose creativity stretches across galaxies, literally and figuratively. Whether he's melting faces on stage with Bohemian Rhapsody or calculating the movement of interplanetary dust, one thing is clear: Brian May has always reached for the stars and brought the rest of us with him. But while Queen has achieved massive success, very little people know the story of how they achieved so much success. The early days of Queen. When Queen first formed in 1970, the road ahead wasn't paved with gold records and sold-out stadiums. In fact, it was paved with rejection letters, small-time gigs, and a seemingly endless loop of closed doors. Despite their raw talent and undeniable chemistry, Queen struggled to gain traction. They couldn't land a proper record deal because they didn't have a following, yet they couldn't build a following without a deal. It was the classic catch-22 that nearly every aspiring band dreads. Brian May once described those early days as a relentless grind. Without industry backing, they were locked out of the big venues and big opportunities. But instead of giving in, Queen leaned in hard. They spent countless hours writing, rehearsing, arranging, and performing, always sharpening their edge. May explained it simply: they had to be so prepared, so polished, that when even the smallest window of opportunity opened, they could leap through it without hesitation. And that's exactly what they did. Their discipline paid off, and soon word about a rock band named Queen started to spread. Queen wasn't just another rock band, though. They were something different, something magnetic, and by the time the right ears finally heard them, they were already operating like a band that belonged in the big leagues. Their breakthrough came when they signed their first record deal, marking the turning point in a journey that had been fueled by determination, guts, and an unwavering belief in their own sound. In July 1973, Queen released their self-titled debut album. It didn't launch them into superstardom overnight, but it did announce them to the world in a big way. The album was a roller coaster of styles and moods, blending hard rock, progressive experimentation, and operatic flair. Tracks like Keep Yourself Alive exploded with energy, while Doing All Right revealed the band's softer, more introspective side. The project earned solid reviews and set the foundation for what would become one of the most iconic discographies in music history. The climb from that point was fast and furious. Queen's next few albums built on their signature sound, each one more ambitious than the last. By the mid to late 70s, they were headlining arenas, dominating charts, and releasing the kind of hits that would become generational anthems. Killer Queen, Somebody to Love, Don't Stop Me Now, and of course, Bohemian Rhapsody. That song alone was a revelation. A 6-minute, genre-defying epic that defied every rule in the radio playbook, and yet became one of the most beloved songs of all time. It was theatrical, chaotic, beautiful, and haunting. It was Queen. But the band wasn't just about studio wizardry. Their live shows were next level. Freddie Mercury ruled the stage like a born king. Brian May's guitar could make an arena tremble. Roger Taylor's drumming roared with fire. And John Deacon's smooth, steady bass grounded every performance with perfection. Together, they didn't just play shows, they created moments. And as Queen's fame grew, so did their influence. Their songs became more than just hits. They became part of the cultural fabric. Tracks like "We Are the Champions" and "We Will Rock You" echoed through stadiums, locker rooms, protests, and celebrations around the world. Their music spoke to resilience, pride, rebellion, and the thrill of being alive. Even their music videos broke boundaries. Bohemian Rhapsody wasn't just a hit single, it was also one of the first videos to prove that visuals could be just as powerful as the sound. Radio Gaga, Under Pressure, and so many others pushed creative limits and turned the band into pioneers of the MTV era before MTV even existed. Queen had it all: showmanship, artistry, innovation, and a relentless desire to evolve. And it all began with those early struggles, the ones that forced them to work harder, dream bigger, and be absolutely ready when the world finally started to listen. But while the band was reaching new heights, Brian May's love life was slowly unraveling under the weight of his newfound fame. The real reason Brian May's first marriage fell apart. Brian May once confessed that his first marriage didn't crumble on the road, it fell apart when the touring stopped. The Queen guitarist had married Chrissy Mullen in 1976, and together they raised 3 children. For over a decade, Chrissy stood by him while he traveled the world, gracing massive stages and becoming a rock legend. The family life somehow survived the wild ride of Queen's global fame. But when the lights dimmed and the guitar was set down, May found himself struggling with something far more ordinary: domesticity. He recalled that once the touring eased, and they tried to settle into what others might call a normal life, it didn't work. He found it difficult to reconnect with the routine and rhythm of home. Brian saw himself as a husband and father above all else. But still, something had changed. He described looking into the mirror and being shocked that a whole person stared back because inside he felt incomplete. The touring life had changed him. Eventually, he admitted that it wasn't just the strain of readjustment that ended things. He had fallen in love with someone else. Actress Anita Dobson, whom he met in 1986. Though the affair made reconciliation impossible, the relationship with Anita became something lasting. Despite early doubts, even Freddie Mercury and Brian's manager believed it wouldn't survive. They proved everyone wrong. May once recalled how people thought they were too volatile, or that marrying an actress was a bad idea. But years later, while sitting beside Anita during a talk show appearance, he simply smiled and said, "Well, somehow we're still here." They married in 2000 and have been together ever since. The collapse of his marriage came during one of the darkest periods of Brian's life. Around the same time, he lost his father, followed closely by the death of his friend and bandmate, Freddie Mercury. These events unraveled him emotionally, pulling him into deep grief. That pain and soul-searching were poured into his 1992 solo album, Back to the Light. The album was raw, more than just music. It was therapy. It became his way of processing the emotional wreckage left behind by loss, heartbreak, and life's harsh detours. Meanwhile, behind the scenes of the band, another storm had already been brewing. One that would eventually give the world Queen's most iconic masterpiece, Bohemian Rhapsody. The behind-the-scene tension that birthed Bohemian Rhapsody. With Bohemian Rhapsody, Queen didn't just release a song, they detonated a musical bombshell that blew apart every rule of rock songwriting and left the world stunned in the best possible way. What began as scribbles on scraps of paper by a young Freddie Mercury during his art college days evolved into one of the most ambitious and iconic songs ever recorded. Back in the late 1960s, Mercury shared with his bandmates that he had 3 different song ideas swirling in his head. But instead of writing them as separate tracks, he imagined something more daring, combining them into one long genre-defying epic. The result was a 6-minute roller coaster of sound. Part rock ballad, part opera, part headbanging chaos. that would go on to become Queen's signature anthem, and, decades later, the title of a hit biopic that immortalized the band's legacy. By mid-1975, Queen began rehearsing the song in earnest at Ridge Farm Studio in Surrey, before refining it over several weeks at Penrose Court in Herefordshire. When they were finally ready, they dove into recording at Rockfield Studios in Wales on August 24th. Brian May remembered that stepping into the studio to work on the track felt like a rush of adrenaline. The moment, he said, was just the biggest thrill. The structure of the song was unlike anything anyone had ever attempted. It opened with an eerie a cappella question: is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Before moving through lush harmonies, a piano-led ballad, an intense operatic section, a guitar-heavy rock explosion, and a haunting close. Each part was meticulously crafted. Mercury had written out every harmony for the opera section, and the band devoted an entire week to recording it. They stacked up to 160 vocal overdubs using 24-track analog tape, with Mercury covering the middle register, May on the low end, and Roger Taylor belting out the high parts. Mercury threw himself into the performance with typical flair. The vocals soared, dipped, and danced through Mamma Mia, Galileo, and Figaro, bouncing across octaves like a Broadway ensemble packed into one voice. At one point, the tape was so worn from constant re-recording that it became translucent. May recalled how holding it up to the light revealed just how close they'd come to losing the entire track. Every time Freddie added more Galileos, they were sacrificing something else. One of those Galileos, it turns out, was a nod to May's love of astronomy. He'd eventually earn a PhD in astrophysics, and the rest of the song was filled with literary and cultural gems. Scaramouche, a character from 16th century Italian comedy. Bismillah, the Islamic phrase meaning "in the name of God," and Beelzebub, an old name for the devil. Mercury never explained the meaning of the lyrics in detail, but May once reflected that Freddie likely poured more of himself into that song than he let on. On the surface, he was flamboyant and quick-witted, but beneath it, there were layers of insecurity and a personal struggle with identity. Once recording was complete with final touches at studios like Roundhouse, Scorpio Sound, and Wessex Sound, there was a unanimous sense among the band and their producer, Roy Thomas Baker, that they'd made something historic. Baker remembered standing at the back of the control room and just knowing. It felt like listening to a moment that would be studied, dissected, and celebrated for decades to come. Despite the band's excitement, their record label wasn't convinced. A 6-minute single was unheard of, and executives warned the song wouldn't get any radio play. Queen didn't budge. They insisted Bohemian Rhapsody was the single. It was a risky move until Mercury's friend, Capitol Radio DJ Kenny Everett, got his hands on it. He played it 14 times in one weekend, drumming up so much listener excitement that the label had no choice but to give in. And just like that, history began to unfold. To support the single, Queen shot a promotional video, now widely regarded as the first true music video. Directed by Bruce Gowers, it was filmed in just 3 hours at Elstree Studios for £3,500. The video recreated the haunting pose from their Queen E2 album cover, cutting between dramatic performance shots and Mercury bathed in Marlene Dietrich-style lighting. The result was mesmerizing. It premiered on Top of the Pops on November 20th, 1975, and instantly became the talk of the town. Queen watched the debut from a hotel room in Taunton, already sensing the cultural earthquake they'd set off. In the UK, Bohemian Rhapsody hit #1 and refused to budge for 9 consecutive weeks. It fended off all competition, including an unexpected novelty hit by Laurel and Hardy. It also became the only song to top the UK charts twice at Christmas, first in 1975 and again after Mercury's death in 1991. In the US, it cracked the top 10 and became Queen's first major American hit. The B-side? Roger Taylor's I'm in Love with My Car, a cult favorite in its own right. From there, Bohemian Rhapsody cemented itself in Queen's live performances. It was a showstopper during their 1975 A Night at the Opera tour, and later opened their iconic Live Aid set in 1985, where it thundered through Wembley Stadium and reached millions watching around the world. In 2004, the track was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. Rolling Stone readers named Mercury's performance the greatest rock vocal of all time. By 2018, it had become the most streamed song of the 20th century, surpassing 1.6 billion plays and overtaking Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. In July 2019, the video crossed 1 billion views on YouTube, and in 2021, it earned Diamond certification from the RIAA, a rare feat for a rock single. Years before all this, Mercury had summed it up best. He believed Bohemian Rhapsody had a dreamlike quality, a kind of magical ambiguity. He once said people should listen, feel it, and make up their own minds about what it meant. Whatever it means to each listener, one thing is clear. Bohemian Rhapsody isn't just a song, it's a revolution in 6 minutes. A piece of Queen's soul wrapped in opera, rock, and poetry. And it still leaves us breathless. But behind the music that redefined a generation, behind the roaring guitar solos, the soaring vocals, and the thunderous applause, there were quiet storms brewing. Creative brilliance often comes at a cost. And for Queen, that cost sometimes revealed itself in the cracks between personalities. The tensions between Brian May and John Deacon. They stood side by side on some of the biggest stages in rock history, the silent bass player and the curly-haired guitar wizard. At first glance, John Deacon and Brian May appeared to move in perfect sync, their instruments weaving magic behind Freddie Mercury's tone. But beneath the surface, the two men were worlds apart, not just in personality, but in the way they viewed music, control, and the soul of Queen itself. John was quiet, introverted, and often preferred to work in isolation. He wasn't the kind to argue or make noise in interviews, but inside the studio, he had very specific ideas, and he didn't always want to bend. Brian, on the other hand, was deeply invested in every detail, famously meticulous and passionate about Queen's rock identity. He wasn't afraid to steer the ship or voice concerns, which often put him at odds with John's simpler, funkier instincts. Things started to shift with Another One Bites the Dust. It was pure Deacon, stripped down, funky, inspired by the likes of Chick. When it topped charts worldwide, especially in the US, John's instincts were suddenly validated. Freddie loved it. Even Michael Jackson had reportedly pushed the band to release it as a single. Brian, however, wasn't as convinced. He respected the song's success, but it was far from the Queen sound he cherished. Then came Hot Space in 1982, the album that exposed just how differently the bandmates were thinking. John leaned fully into funk, synth, and dance rhythms. Freddie followed him down that road. Brian and Roger, they weren't thrilled. Brian later admitted the band had gotten sidetracked and that he hated the record's direction. The guitars were dialed back, replaced with bass grooves, drum machines, and shimmering synths. It wasn't a rock album, not by a long shot. John, though, was in his element. He took more control in the studio, writing tracks like Back Chat, which clashed directly with Brian's rock instincts. On that song, the tension boiled over as Brian's guitar solo was famously shortened in the mix, and there were reports of heated disagreements over how the track should sound. John had produced it himself and wasn't interested in compromise. It was one of the rare moments where the quiet man pushed back and hard. Behind closed doors, there was friction. Some fans even speculated that the lyrics of Back Chat, "When I talk to you, you're always full of lies, don't talk back," were directed at Brian. A subtle jab at his control in the studio. While neither man ever confirmed it, the tension was palpable. The creative clash over back chat became a defining moment in their uneasy partnership. That same dynamic played out again with I Want to Break Free, another John Deacon creation. It was a catchy, synth-heavy anthem with a music video that featured the band in full drag. A cheeky send-up of British soap operas. Freddie loved the idea. Roger thought it was hilarious. But in the US, the video backfired. MTV barely played it. American audiences didn't get the joke, and Brian wasn't thrilled. Years later, he reflected that the video really damaged their reputation in America. Though he never publicly blamed John, fans could read between the lines. The song wasn't Brian's vision. He didn't write it, didn't love its musical direction, and the fallout from the video only deepened the creative divide between him and John. Despite his calm exterior, there were rare moments when John's frustration bubbled to the surface. During the Hot Space tour, fans witnessed him throw his bass into his amp stack after a show. Not out of showmanship, but in genuine anger. It was a jarring image. The quietest member of Queen making the loudest noise. Was it aimed at Brian? At the stress of the tour? No one really knows. But it was clear that something was building up inside him and that it wasn't just stage nerves. In 1986, John wrote 1 Year of Love for the A Kind of Magic album. It was another tender romantic track with no trace of Brian's signature guitar. Instead, it featured a saxophone solo. Why? According to whispers from those close to the band, John had originally planned for Brian to contribute a solo, but the two clashed over the direction of the track. In the end, John cut the guitar entirely. For a band known for its tight musical bond, it was a telling omission, and another hint at the underlying power struggle between them. After Freddie's death in 1991, the surviving members came together to complete Made in Heaven using leftover vocal tracks. But during those sessions, something reportedly snapped. Brian had returned from his solo tour and, according to fan reports and band lore, made sweeping changes to the mixes, allegedly scrapping a lot of John's earlier production work. John didn't take it well. Those close to the band have hinted this may have been the moment that finally pushed him to step away for good. Though never confirmed publicly, the timeline speaks for itself. After those sessions, John Deacon began to disappear. In 1997, Queen performed with Elton John at a ballet gala in Geneva. It was supposed to be a moment of reflection and tribute to Freddie. But for John, it was the end. Brian later recalled that as soon as they walked off stage, John looked at them and said, "I can't do this anymore." There was no fight, no blow-up, just quiet, final resignation. He never performed with Queen again. Since then, John has remained silent, avoiding all interviews, refusing to join the band for tours or tribute concerts, and keeping away from public life. Brian and Roger have continued to carry the Queen name, collaborating with other vocalists, playing sold-out stadiums. But John, he chose the opposite path. And while Brian speaks respectfully about him to this day, there's always a note of sadness in his voice, as if some part of him knows they lost each other long before the world ever noticed. They were two sides of a brilliant coin, one chasing sound through complexity, the other chasing rhythm through simplicity. And somewhere between those differences, the unspoken tension shaped some of the most iconic music ever recorded. But once the music stopped, so did the partnership. The relationship between Brian May and John Deacon now. Even after stepping away from the spotlight more than 2 decades ago, John Deacon's presence still lingers in Queen's orbit. Though he officially exited the band in 1997, his voice, quiet as it may be, continues to matter behind the scenes. Brian May, now 77, recently revealed in an interview with Mojo 4 Music that the elusive bassist still holds a subtle but powerful influence over Queen's major decisions. Deacon may no longer be writing bass lines or tinkering with amps in the studio, but when it comes to the direction of the band, he still gets the final word. May explained that while Deacon prefers not to be creatively involved, they always hear from him when it counts. Messages reach them confirming that he's satisfied with what they're doing, and the band, in turn, respects his need for peace and distance. He doesn't want the stress of being involved creatively, May shared, and we respect that. Freddie Mercury, of course, is no longer with them, but May and Roger Taylor often find themselves wondering what Freddie or John might say. The four of us worked as a team for so long, May reflected, that Roger and I have a pretty good idea what our fellow Queen members would be saying. He paused, noting with a half-smile that their partnership had lasted longer than most marriages. John Deacon joined Queen in 1971, becoming the final piece of a now legendary puzzle. Quiet and unassuming on stage, he was a musical force behind the scenes. With a sharp, technical mind, he invented the DC amp, an ingenious little amplifier that May used to create those sweeping guitar orchestrations Queen became known for. Deacon's fingerprints are on every Queen album. From the instantly recognizable bass line of Another One Bites the Dust to the songwriting credits on I Want to Break Free, his contributions were vast, even if his demeanor was the opposite of flashy. But everything changed after Mercury's death in 1991. Deacon grew increasingly reclusive, his public appearances dwindling until he quietly bowed out in 1997. Since then, he stayed completely silent. No interviews, no public events, just a quiet life out of the spotlight. For fans who grew up with his music, his absence is a mystery that's only deepened with time. Yet, his connection to the band isn't severed. It's simply shifted. He may not step on stage anymore, but he watches from a distance, gives his blessing when needed, and remains an essential thread in the Queen fabric. Meanwhile, May and Taylor aren't ruling out the future. In a recent conversation with Uncut, Taylor hinted that something new might be brewing. He said he and May had been talking, and both agreed that if they stumbled upon material that felt fresh and strong, there was no reason not to record it. We can still play. We can still sing, he pointed out, so I don't see why not. Could a new chapter for Queen be on the horizon? It's possible. And even if John Deacon never picks up a bass again, his shadow will be there quietly approving or not, just as it always has been. Which Queen song is still your favorite? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.